Richard's life in Oregon seemed ordinary at first glance. He was a middle-aged family man, living in a cozy suburban house with his wife and 2 young children. But the picturesque neighborhood, once defined by white picket fences and blooming gardens, now held a sinister fate. As the sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns, Richard couldn't ignore the weight of the country's state. 10 years prior, the government, in a move that promised to revolutionize society, had passed a groundbreaking piece of legislation. It allowed corporations to buy up residential properties and convert them into rentals, all under the guise of better living. The concept was deceptively appealing. Citizens were freed from the burdens of mortgages, property taxes, and maintenance, theoretically freeing up time for hobbies and interests. Yet, behind the facade of utopia, dissent brewed. Many, including Richard, felt a growing unease. Promise routinely echoed through the airwaves, a tantalizing vision of a better life. Richard couldn't escape the commercials that portrayed smiling families, carefree and content. No more mortgages, no more property taxes, no more worries, the soothing voiceovers proclaimed. At first, it seemed like a dream come true. Richard and his family watched as others in the community eagerly embraced the concept. The burdens of home ownership melted away. The promise of more leisure time, freedom to pursue passions, and a brighter future for their children was enticing. Yet, Richard couldn't shake the nagging doubts that festered in his mind. He saw the fine print, the subtle erosion of property rights, and the ever-tightening grip of the corporations. The government painted a picture of harmony, but beneath the surface, divisions grew deeper. While some reveled in newfound leisure, others, like Richard, questioned the cost of their apparent freedom. They wondered if the corporations truly had the people's best interests at heart, or if they were merely profiting from their dependency. As Richard pondered these concerns, he couldn't ignore the discomfort gnawing at him. He sensed that the government's promise, once so alluring, was a carefully woven illusion, concealing a reality that threatened to swallow them all. In the shadows of the government's grand promises, a murmur of opposition began to grow. Citizens, once united by hope, now found themselves divided. Friends argued, families debated, and neighborhoods fractured. Richard witnessed the emergence of dissenters who refused to accept the surface-level utopia. They were the ones who dared to ask the unsettling questions that echoed through the streets. What price were they truly paying for this so-called better living situation? The nation had been severed into zones, each under the watchful eye of a different corporation. In Richard's corner of Oregon, the notorious Blue Boulder Corporation held sway. They had won the government contract for this region, promising a future where every citizen's needs would be met, a future free from property-related concerns. Blue Boulder, with its slick marketing campaigns and charismatic CEOs, had convinced many that they were benevolent stewards. Yet, Richard couldn't ignore the rapid changes. Their corporate logos seemed to appear on every street corner, a constant reminder of their presence. As the years passed, Blue Boulder's influence deepened. Their agents prowled the streets, offering enticing deals to homeowners, subtly nudging them toward relinquishing their properties. Richard's neighbors, those who'd held out against the allure of profit, became islands in a sea of corporate conformity. He couldn't help but wonder, beneath the polished exterior of Blue Boulder, what motives truly lurked. The division between those who embraced their vision and those who resisted grew starker, casting a long shadow over Richard's once peaceful community. Over the span of a decade, the relentless march of corporations continued. Blue Boulder and their counterparts had devoured every residential property that had hit the market, turning them into profit-yielding rentals. The promise of carefree living had come at a price. Richard watched helplessly as his once vibrant neighborhood transformed. For sale signs became a rarity, replaced by corporate insignias. Many homeowners had sold, lured by the allure of easy money. Those who remained held onto their homes, driven by a stubborn resolve to preserve their way of life. It was no longer about simple home ownership. It was a battle to retain a sense of identity and independence. Richard and his neighbors, outnumbered and outgunned by the corporate giants, stood as a dwindling resistance against the tide of change. The corporate takeover was nearing completion, and they were running out of time. The corporate juggernaut seemed unstoppable, but Richard, like many, refused any temptation. To reach their utopian vision, the government needed to take further measures to ensure compliance. The government hastily passed the Buyout Act, a new piece of legislation that required the assessment and sale of all outstanding, privately owned residential properties across the country. The Buyout Program bestowed upon the Blue Boulder Corporation the authority to enter any residential property within their zone. Their mission? To assess the property's value and, in essence, seal its fate. Under this grim new law, Richard's once private haven became subject to intrusion. Blue Boulder's representatives roamed his property and others in the neighborhood, their tablet devices in hand, evaluating homes with ruthless efficiency. The agents dictated a property's worth, erasing sentimental value and community ties. Once the value was determined, a buyout proposal was submitted to the Better Living Approval Committee, a faceless entity with the power to grant the sale. The committee always gloated their 100% proposal approval rate. A few days after the agents roamed his property, Richard received the dreaded buyout notice. It was an official decree, specifying the amount that would soon materialize in his bank account and the official possession law state. The letter arrived in a plain, unassuming envelope, slipped beneath Richard's front door like a shadowy harbinger of doom. He retrieved it, his heart quickening with trepidation, and the weight of the envelope seemed heavier than lead. With trembling hands, he tore it open, revealing the ominous contents. The buyout notice was stark, its language cold and impersonal. It stipulated the sum that would soon be deposited into his bank account. Richard's eyes darted to the amount, a number that paled in comparison to the value he placed on the home where his children had taken their first steps, where he and his wife had built their life together. The letter also stipulated that on the appointed day, the rental agreement would take effect, rendering Richard's house no longer his own. Despair washed over him as the cruel reality sank in. The agreement was imminent, a lifelong sentence to perpetual renting. His home, the sanctuary of his dreams, would be lost forever. Richard slumped into a chair, clutching the notice, his eyes blurred with tears. In that moment, he felt not only robbed of his property, but of his very essence. His place in a world where individual ownership had become an unattainable dream.